Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today we're discussing the Omega Speedmaster 57 coaxial chronometer, a chronograph in 41.5mm that combines the best of past and present in a single technically and aesthetically accomplished package. See it and own it on our website. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you enjoy these videos, and please click on the card in the upper right hand corner of the screen at any time during this video to see our full sales listing for this watch with additional accessories included in the sale, high-resolution images for your desktop, and naturally complete pricing details for this Omega Speedmaster 57 coaxial chronometer chronograph. Now, this line debuted in 2013, and it has quite a good deal to recommend it. It's a sweet spot in the Omega Speedmaster collection, which is A, a labyrinth because it's so big, and B, tends to pull you in different directions because the different allures of history and contemporary design often make it challenging to choose between them. This watch offers you both a traditional bi-register chronograph dial with a tri-register chronograph capability, more on that in a moment. The watch also has a handsome case that features some of the bevels of the modern era, but with a generally straight lug geometry and a generously domed sapphire that take you back to the 1950s. Such as the namesake of the watch would suggest, it does have a little bit of a vintage vibe, but it also has color and character. 41.5mm across the case does not include the crown or the chronograph pushers. The watch is thick, although not towering. 16.4mm sounds like a lot until you realize that the watch has an equally domed sapphire on the caseback with a conical caseback, and that domed sapphire, once you buckle it down sized to your wrist, it's probably only a 14mm rise above the wrist, and then you've got the curve of the sapphire to help your suit jacket cuff up and over. Thanks to the cantilever of the tachymeter scale, you're probably not going to clear the dress shirt beneath, but once it's under your jacket sleeve, do you really care? From lug to lug, the watch is fairly compact. 50mm from lug to lug. If you include the solid end links of the bracelet, the watch then extends a more robust 53.9mm across the wrist. Now, if you want to wear this on a smaller wrist, I'd say if you want to wear it on a wrist 14 centimeters in circumference or smaller, you might want to consider putting it on an accessory bracelet. And if you do, then you'll want to know that the lug spacing is 20mm for standard size 20mm straps. It's a hefty watch, not because it's big, but because the bracelet is so robust. Now, you can see the bracelet is simple in design, but it's simple, and I'm going to depress both triggers. This one's designed not to deploy accidentally. You can see that the watch is handsomely made, fully finished inside the clasp. It also has a little bit of an arc to it such that you can put it underneath your wrist and expect that it's not going to chafe because it traces the soft profile of the underside of your wrist. Now, of course, the twin triggers, as you saw, keeping the mechanism quite secure, it cannot pop open accidentally. So while this is not the most intense sporting option Omega offers, nevertheless, it does have most of the inherent toughness of a pure sports watch. All bracelet sizing is done with screws. Pins and sleeves are long gone. And though the bracelet is simple, it is very accomplished. Polished on its flanks, polished down its center with satin finish on the outer edges. It does break up the monotony of the metal. You can also see that the case is fairly simple. It's not a complete straight lug. There is some beveling to add grace and contrast, as well as a transition from the lug hoods to the case band, but overall it's far more like an early Omega Speedmaster CK2915 than something contemporary like, for instance, the Dark Side of the Moon. You'll also note that the watch is effectively all tachymeter, bezel, and dial. When you view it from straight overhead, everything else pretty much melts away. Of course, the tachymeter base 1000, add your own units, can be used for gauging the speed of an object over a fixed distance, such as a standing kilometer or a mile. The dial is spectacular. I mentioned that it has twin register design that is intended to evoke mid-century chronographs that had chronograph seconds at center and minutes on one sub-register. But now you can begin to see that there's actually a mono counter at 3 o'clock, so you have concentric scales for hours and minutes, hours inboard, minutes outboard, so you can still read chronograph hours, minutes, and seconds despite having a double register design. You'll also know just how deeply countersunk those registers are to add another focal plane. And the sunburst quality of this dial, you can't see it too well in the light box until I turn it off axis, but when I do, you realize just how reactive and dynamic this dial can be. Add a few splashes of color in the occasional shock of red, and you have a watch with a lot of personality. And that's before we even discuss that sapphire, which is box section on its flanks and then domed over its top. Expensive to make, but evocative of a vintage plexiglass. It has the charm, but not the vulnerability of scratchable thermoplastic. Now you can see all applied and polished indices, also luminescent. Alpha style hands, just like the original Speedmaster, pinched at their center, more elegant in my opinion than Dauphine hands, and more romantic than the baton style hands on something like the Speedmaster Moonwatch. You'll also note that the watch features an applied Omega marquee at 12 o'clock, and a discrete date window down at 6 o'clock. Now let's talk a little bit about how the functionality of the caliber 9300 expresses itself on the dial side. First, let's move the minute hand out of the way so you can see the date. Note that when I move the crown to an intermediate position, I am able to access the watch's travel time function, jumping forward or backwards in 1 hour increments as I fly or sail. You'll also note how the watch does not stop keeping time when I am engaging this function, so it doesn't affect the precision of the watch. Now you'll also note that I can drive the date forward or backwards without hazard to the movement if I do happen to travel across the international date line. And finally, if I pull it to extremity, you do hack the balance now, stopping the seconds, allowing for precise synchronization to a reference time. We'll expand the bracelet one more time because we do want to take a look at the caseback. I can only tell you so much about the caliber 9300. You should also take a look at it. It's handsome, though principally machine finished. This is done to a high degree and with an element of imagination as the arabesque coat splay out in a beautiful sort of spiral pattern that's echoed on the winding rotor and omnipresent on the bridges. Rather than using blue oxidized screws, Omega uses black, and then there are a few inked shocks of red that tell you various curious pieces of trivia about the movement. Do you need anything that's printed on this movement to operate the watch? No, but it lets you know what you're paying for, and you do get a lot. You note a free-sprung balance with a full bridge for robust shock resistance, a SI14 amagnetic hairspring, highly resistant to magnetic fields. It's the upper reaches of what's considered anti-magnetic, perhaps falling just short of amagnetic. It means the watch is highly resistant to the flux created by speakers, subwoofers, high-powered wiring looms, as well as the fields around the closures of wallets and purses and refrigerator doors. It beats away at a quirky 25,200 vibrations per hour that's unique to the co-axial system. Now, of course, it does have the co-axial escapement, a tri-level version of the coaxial, first envisioned by George Daniels, the legendary and late independent watchmaker. Today, in this variant, the 9300 and its time-only equivalent, the 8500, the system realizes all of the original promise of the coaxial, with greater long-term timing stability, short-term timing precision, and reduced maintenance needs. Now, the timepiece also features a column wheel and a vertical clutch architecture for the chronograph. The column wheel, which you can actually see through its skeletonized bridge, I may as well give you a view of the works since I promised you a display case back. You can see the column wheel operating and interacting with the levers and horns of the chronograph system through the skeletonized apertures in the bridge. And you can see on the dial side the advantage of the lateral clutch. The column wheel means the system is crisp to operate. The vertical clutch, which this watch has, means that there is no jump to the chronograph seconds hand. When it starts, it simply commences and begins to proceed. It does not jump, it does not stagger when you halt it, and it always resets precisely to the index at 12, because once again, lateral clutches have play, but vertical clutches do not. The watch also features twin mainspring barrels and a robust 60 hours of power reserve when fully wound. Of course, it's also automatic winding, so this watch is principally set it and forget it accurate. And if you do want to rotate through another watch every other day, remember, you can always put this one on a day or two later and it will still be beating. You can see and own this vintage evocative but thoroughly contemporary Omega Speedmaster 57 coaxial chronometer chronograph